Welcome to the Personality Couch podcast, where we discuss all things personality and clinical practice. I'm your host, Doc Bach, and I'm here with my co-host, Doc Fish. We are both licensed clinical psychologists in private practice, and today we are continuing our Schizotypal personality series. In this episode, we unpack the 9 signs and symptoms of schizotypal personality. We talk at length about what it means to be in the gray area of almost psychotic, but not quite, and how beliefs, speech, behavior, and interactions with others can give us clues about what lies underneath. This is a fascinating one, so we better jump in.
Okay, so schizotypal made its appearance in the DSM-3 in 1980 as it was split off from schizoid personality. Researchers and clinicians found that there was a pre-psychotic character that was similar to schizophrenia but not fully psychotic, but also unique from schizoid as well. So schizotypal came on the scene to describe a quasi-psychotic, schizoid, schizophrenia-like character.
Yes, that's correct.
So let's open the DSM and actually talk about what this personality looks like when it's clinically significant or even diagnostic.
Absolutely. Okay, so first off, for a personality disorder, it has to be lifelong and pervasive. It is not a bad day or bad season. It's stable and enduring, and it's not substance-induced. That's a different disorder.
Right. And if you followed along in our schizoid series, you're going to notice a lot of overlap here. Schizoid and schizotypal have very similar origins, and they're both part of the cluster A personality disorders in the DSM, or what's called odd or eccentric personalities. So both have challenges interpersonally, and there's an overall low need for relationships, and social interactions are endured with discomfort.
Exactly. Yeah. So then the biggest difference with schizotypal is the oddities and eccentric thoughts, sensory experiences, and behavior. This is what tells us there is more going on and puts them in this pre-psychotic or even quasi-psychotic camp. So the DSM actually does a nice job telling us what to look for and how we can tell that someone is on the cusp of reality. But whether or not it should be a separate category that stands on its own is controversial, but the description regarding towing the line of psychosis is helpful.
So in order to meet criteria for schizotypal personality disorder, 5 of the 9 criteria have to be present. The first is ideas of reference. What are ideas of reference? Well, the DSM notes that ideas of reference are incorrect interpretations of causal incidences and external events as having a particular and unusual meaning specifically for the person.
Yeah. So in other words, regular everyday events take on a specific meaning or become very personal.
Exactly. Now, the APA dictionary describes ideas of reference as the sense that events or the actions of others, like talking or whispering or smiling, relate particularly to oneself.
Like that right there. What you smiled or how you smiled or what you said, like that was for me specifically. So let's look at some examples of this, though. So maybe Taylor Swift wrote that line in a song just to tell me that she winked at me when I saw her in concert. Or, more likely, everyone in that car that just passed is talking about me because I saw the driver look at me. Or that person over there in the crowd sat down because I told them to in my head.
Yes, but there's also a difference between an idea and a delusion. So an idea of reference might be like I can't help but think it and believe it maybe for a little bit, but when I'm shown evidence, I can see that it's not likely. Versus a delusion of reference is like, well, that happened, like the end, regardless of any evidence to the contrary. It just happened.
Yeah. Yep.
An idea of reference can become a delusion of reference if it's held to so firmly despite evidence that disconfirms it. So delusions are evidence of psychotic thought processes, which they're more severe than actual schizotypal personality.
Yes. So schizotypal ideas of reference are indicators of cognitive slippage. So in other words, we're not in psychosis yet, but we flirt with that line. And some level of insight and the ability to take in new data really is the difference here between psychosis and that borderline psychotic place. But it can be very tricky to distinguish.
And also, can you imagine how distressing that could be?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I mean, we'll get to this in a minute, but no wonder schizotypals are so afraid, right? Okay. So the second criterion is odd beliefs or magical thinking that influences behavior and is inconsistent with subcultural norms. This is key. Inconsistent with subcultural norms. They might be superstitious or preoccupied with paranormal or otherworldly phenomena that are outside the norms of their subculture. It's like fringe reality type stuff, or more extreme superstitiousness, which you can see how this would tie into ideas of reference, right?
So an example might be that a person is talking about me because I stepped on a crack in the produce aisle.
There's that connection about those two. Yeah. But this also goes along with sensory phenomena, like feeling as though there's an additional sixth sense or an ability to take in information, read information, be in the future or the past, etc.
They might believe that they have special powers to sense events before they happen, like clairvoyance, or to read others' thoughts.
Like telepathy. So even to send thoughts, right?
Now, the APA dictionary defines magical thinking as the belief that events or the behaviors of others can be influenced by one's own thoughts, wishes, or rituals. So they may believe that they have magical control over others, which can be implemented directly or indirectly through compliance with magical rituals. So directly would be like believing that their spouse taking the dog out for a walk is the direct result of thinking an hour earlier that it should be done. Or indirectly walking past a specific object like 3 times to avoid a certain harmful outcome.
You can see how this right here dovetails into that superstitiousness, right? So interestingly, magical thinking is typical of children up to 4 or 5 years of age. So it is a developmentally normal thing up to a point, and then it's just no longer appropriate.
Right. So kids might think like, I was mad at mommy, so she left. Or like, well, I had a fight with my sibling and now they're sick.
Yes, those are really great examples. So it's a regressed way of viewing the world. It's very childlike. It's not dangerous and it's not psychotic, but it is an indicator of cognitive slippage in the adult brain because a healthy functioning adult brain would typically not make that connection.
Correct. Okay. And then let's talk about the subcultural norms aspect of this criterion for a minute. We actually had a question about this in an early episode of the series. So how do we know if it's just a bizarre fad belief of the culture or part of a religious tradition? Like, what do we do with that? Is it evidence of schizotypal or pre-psychotic phenomena?
Yes. Great questions. And I think this is only getting harder to differentiate now that we're so interconnected socially online, where fringe thoughts can become mainstream rather quickly. But if we look back in history, there have been major historical events where a folie à deux or a shared delusion does take over a religious group or a region, etc. 2 big examples that I always use are the Salem witch trials and the Jonestown cult. So the difference here is that while, of course, morally, ethically, these historical events and religious cults were not okay, they were, quote, culturally appropriate in that region or were a significant part of that cult's belief system. Like if everyone in that people group is thinking it, it certainly could cross over into dangerous shared delusion territory, but that's not what this criterion is talking about with schizotypal.
Right. Odd and magical beliefs here are subcultural. So they're not popular. They don't catch on with the group. Schizotypal individuals are often in their own little worlds, and the larger group context may or may not impact them. But overall, this criterion is referencing psychological content that is unique to the individual, even when considering cultural and religious factors.
Yeah. And I will say, too, that this is also where a professional opinion or professional help is really important. If you think you have schizotypal or a family member does, or you're not sure if this is like religious stuff or cultural stuff or what exactly this is, like we as psychologists are trained diagnosticians. Like we actually have a lot of training in differential diagnosis and how to interpret behavior in its context, including the culture itself, religious stuff, faith beliefs, so that we don't over-pathologize. That doesn't mean we always get it right, because people are tricky and it's challenging, but we do have the training to be able to kind of pull those pieces together and figure out what's what. But anyway, let's keep going with this criteria for schizotypal.
So we're on the third criteria, which is unusual perceptual experiences, including bodily illusions. So this symptom showcases like a misfiring of sensory experiences, like including where the body is in space. So let's break this down. Perceptual alterations may be present. So like sensing that another person is present, but no one's actually there.
Okay, so some examples of this, like with seeing or visual, like maybe that's seeing a shadow out of the corner of your eye. And then with hearing or auditory, maybe that looks like hearing a voice murmuring your name. And then with touch or tactile, maybe that's feeling wind on your skin when there's none. And then with gustation and olfactory senses, maybe you might have like phantom smells or tastes, like smelling or tasting onions for a second or two.
And I do want to point out that this is not at a level of psychosis. They're not hallucinations, but they're like more illusions.
Yes.
And then it can also include like the body system or proprioceptive or kinesthetic. So that might look like my right leg is longer than my left. And then now I'm limping or walking weird, even though it's not real. Or out of body experiences, which can also be called depersonalizations. Maybe sensations of floating, dissociation, like this body isn't mine, is it? Like, is this my hand?
This pinky finger isn't mine. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And then on to the fourth criterion, which is odd thinking and speech. So their speech may include unusual or idiosyncratic phrasing and construction. It's often loose, digressive, or vague, but without actual derailment or incoherence. It's not word salad. It's not psychosis.
So let's break down some examples here, because there's actually a lot of ways that odd thinking and speech can look. So the first one that we'll unpack is vague speech. So things like, well, they kind of maybe sometimes did that thing I don't like. Very vague, right? Or maybe they're talking all around the subject using deep metaphorical language, but not actually answering the question, or they're speaking in abstract terms. And it's interesting because I actually found on Reddit, someone asked what this looks like. And one person's response was so interesting. They said it's like having a cheese grater in your brain and in your larynx. Everything gets jumbled before it comes out. And it makes perfect sense to the person speaking, but not to others, right?
That is interesting. Okay. So another one is called loose speech. So an example would be, I saw a butterfly and I really like herb and garlic butter on my steak and cows are cute. Oh, so presumably they jumped there because of having a butterfly steak, but those are not related in context. Like it's a loose association.
Exactly. Yes, it is. Yeah. And then we have circumstantial speech. So think of it like a circle that actually eventually comes back around to the main point. So an example, I went to the grocery store for carrots, and carrots are orange, and I saw an orange butterfly at the park last year when I went after eating carrot soup, and I'm making carrot soup from the carrots I got at the grocery store.
Okay. So it did go back to that main point.
Eventually.
Okay. Yes. Now, tangential never gets back to the main point. So for example, I went to the grocery store for carrots, and carrots are orange, and I saw an orange butterfly at the park last year, and the park had baseball, which I watched last night before I watched the stars in the sky.
Okay. Yeah.
Didn't get back to the main point.
No, we didn't come back. And then metaphorical, I alluded to this before, but that might look like orange butterflies are like the sun in our darkest hour, coming up over the horizon and giving the soul a reason to be reborn. Like, whoa, say what? Like very, very flowery, beautiful, poetic language, but there's nothing there. What are you talking about? Yeah.
Right. But then there can be over elaborate speech, which is way too much detail about one specific piece. So, for example, if I'm asked what I like on my pizza, and then I go on for 10 minutes about pizza and why I like it and the type of crust I prefer and how Papa John's make it and how I learned to make it too. And I put mozzarella cheese for like stuffed crust, and the spices are all involved in there, and where the salami is imported from. And
oh, no, Dogfish, TMI. I just wanted to know what you like on your pizza, not how to make it or where the ingredients are imported from.
Right. Okay. And then we have stereotype speech, which is speech that is patterned or rhythmic. So like, I run, fast, 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 fast. Or overly concrete speech. I saw 101 purple, small, fuzzy, smelly, lavender petals on a flower that had a stem. So like this answer is more rigid and logical, but it's a very unusual way to describe a flower that you saw.
Okay, and then we have overly abstract, which is kind of the opposite of your example, Duckfish. So if I'm describing the same flower from the previous example, overly abstract is going to highlight the intangibles, not the concrete evidence. Like, it's something over there, like a whatchamacallit, it's cool, it's a peace flower. It didn't really tell us any information though, right?
Right. And then we just have like unusual speech. For example, I wasn't talkable at work instead of I was less talkative. Now, this might be regressive too. Like when children generalize speech, they might say, I runned, or there were mouses.
Right. Yes. So odd word choices. And what you're saying is that this is similar to how a child might speak, which shows that it's a regressed way of making those connections in the brain.
And stay tuned for our next episode because we talk about regression. Just putting that out there.
Ooh, fascinating.
Okay. All right. On to the fifth criterion. So number 5, suspiciousness or paranoid ideation.
Okay. So this is believing that others are out to get you, persecute you, harass you, or treat you unfairly. So some examples: my peers at work are conspiring against me, or the people at the park are going to take my ball, or the person behind me driving is going to follow me home, or the traffic cameras are always watching me.
Yes, but it is not delusional. It's brief, transient, and able to be challenged.
This is the key piece. Yes, they can take in new data with that suspiciousness and a little bit of that paranoia too.
Right. So now that takes us to the 6th criterion, which is inappropriate or constricted affect. So there is trouble expressing their own emotions and understanding others' emotions and social cues, which can negatively impact relationships. So they can come off as inappropriate, stiff, or constricted.
So constricted is like not really showing emotions. It's like restricted, like it's there, but maybe muted. So maybe a narrowed, diluted version of their emotions. Like they're still eking out a little bit, but that volume is turned way, way down. And then inappropriate affect could be laughing when telling a sad story or being angry when providing help. It can also involve showing no emotions during a really emotional situation, like not displaying fear when you're being robbed.
Yeah, that's a good example. All right. And then the 7th criterion is behavior or appearance that is odd, eccentric, or peculiar.
Yes.
So for example, maybe their outfits don't really quite go together, or maybe they're stained, or their clothes are too small, or just way out of fashion. Their behavior and appearance is unusual because they're not paying attention to the things that other people care about. they really don't notice that give and take of normal social situations.
They might seem unkempt, wear clothes that don't fit, have a non-artistic mismatched fashion. They might have difficulty with banter, sarcasm, or joking, which leads us to number 8. And that is a lack of close friends or confidants other than first-degree relatives.
Even though this is the exact same criterion that schizoid has, it is different. Those with schizotypal personality disorder have difficulty with socializing because they are uncomfortable with people, not detached or uninterested.
Right. Yeah, it's anxiety-based. So there's a slight fear of people or a mistrust, but it's not as pervasive as with paranoid personality disorder. But there is a skittish fear, but it's not a retaliatory fear.
And they do seem to want relationship, often being unhappy with loneliness, but they tend to avoid others, which brings us to the last criterion. So number 9. Excessive social anxiety that does not diminish with familiarity and tends to be associated with paranoid fears rather than negative judgments about the self.
Yes. Okay, let's break this down though. So social anxiety that is persistent and stems from fear of others. So generally, social anxiety as a standalone diagnosis subsides with family or close friends. This is because social anxiety is based on performance fears and criticism. So typically, the more time you spend with someone, it leads to less anxiety and it's a less anxiety-provoking situation. But for the schizotypal, they're not necessarily socially anxious based on performance, though they can be. The social anxiety actually comes from, or at least is exacerbated by, that mistrust or fear of others. They're suspicious of others' motivations, which makes them skittish. Not dangerous, but kind of like scared cats.
And the DSM has another good example, actually. So, for example, when attending a dinner party, the individual with schizotypal personality disorder will not become more relaxed as time goes on, but rather may become increasingly tense and suspicious.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah. And the DSM actually has another great way of describing it. It says they are anxious in social situations, particularly those involving unfamiliar people. They will interact with other individuals when they have to, but prefer to keep to themselves because they feel that they are different and just don't fit in.
Right. And they feel different because they are different. Like their dress, their mannerisms, their speech, but this can make them more self-conscious.
Right. And this is what also separates schizoid from schizotypal. Schizoids aren't as self-conscious, but schizotypals are.
Right. Schizoids don't care.
Yeah.
So schizoids avoid people because of detachment and disinterest. Avoidance, avoid people due to fears of criticism and negative judgment. But schizotypals experience social anxiety that is out of proportion, plus it doesn't get better with more exposure and familiarity. So it's often wrapped up in paranoid fears involving others being out to get them or maybe being hostile, especially because they know that they are different.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah, well said. But importantly, we need to note that schizotypal personality disorder, according to the DSM, does not occur exclusively during the course of schizophrenia, a bipolar or depressive disorder with psychotic features, another psychotic disorder, or autism spectrum disorder. So let's boil this down. It means no psychosis, no autism. Okay? All right. And then as for the schizotypal's relationship to schizophrenia, the DSM tells us that schizotypal can precede schizophrenia, but it certainly isn't the only diagnosis that does, and it's not a prerequisite. But flirting with that psychosis line can mean that you end up in psychosis land. Not always, but sometimes.
Yes. And because schizotypal historically was the personality that was headed towards schizophrenia, but somehow got stuck and just didn't continue to decompensate.
Yeah. But here's a question for you, Doc Fish. So if someone is showing more of a schizotypal personality organization, can they slip into schizophrenia at any point in their life? Or do you think they're more vulnerable during maybe a certain time frame?
Okay, so technically, yes, they can slip into schizophrenia at any point. It will likely be due to environmental stressors or traumas. They're more likely to get stuck on their way to schizophrenia and not fully decompensate, especially with like right supports. But they can backslide. Time, stress can make them slowly fall apart, which is different than schizophrenia, whose onset is in early adulthood.
Aha.
Additionally, I think schizotypals are at more risk for shorter periods of psychosis, like bouncing back, then falling apart, and kind of cycling through that. But eventually, they may end up in psychosis for the long term.
I can see that, especially with age and maybe difficulty springing back, because that cycling back and forth takes a toll on the psyche. But it also makes sense why, according to multiple theorists, schizotypal is one of the 3 unstable structures. It can follow a similar pattern to borderline personality, actually, in its falling apartness and then coming back together. So for some unstable types, there's only so many times that you can bounce back before you can't anymore, right? All right, but here's another question for you. Are schizotypals at an increased risk for schizophrenia development?
Yes. So this plays into the construct of schizotypy. So the groundwork for schizotypy is there, but the expression of it can differ. So maybe we could think about it like schizotypal might be maybe a house made of gingerbread, but then schizophrenia would be a house made of like meringue. Like gingerbread is definitely more durable, but it's still flimsy overall in the stress of life, while meringue is just not stable.
Right. Yes. And if you've ever watched The Great British Bake Off, you will know what we mean. Okay. But another question for you, Doc Fish. So after the brain is developed, is there still an increased risk for developing schizophrenia? And by that, I mean like that 24, 25 years of age mark.
I mean, does the brain ever really stop developing?
Fair.
But yes, I think you're referring to the fact that schizophrenia usually shows up in like the late teenage years, early adulthood.
Yeah.
But schizotypal, if they do fall apart with time, can kind of be like a later onset schizophrenia.
That is so interesting. Yes, yes. All right. But then I have another thought with all this, because this criteria seems to overlap with some of the other personality disorders in the DSM. So specifically, and again, according to the DSM, there is considerable co-occurrence or comorbidity with schizoid, paranoid, avoidant, and borderline personality disorders. So what's up with that?
Well, I wonder if maybe this is a problem where criteria overlap too much in the DSM. So we can see the overlap with schizoid, of course. Some would even say that schizotypal is a more severe form of schizoid. Then there's certainly are elements of paranoia to the schizotypal.
Yeah.
Avoidant has a lot of overlap with schizoid, and borderline describes a diagnosis that's in the gray between psychotic and neurotic, and there's overlap.
Yeah. There's no wonder, right? Yeah. So this makes so much sense. And I'm also thinking about the overlap with the cluster A personalities, which are schizoid, schizotypal, and paranoid. So I think you're onto something, Doc Fish.
I'll put a little nugget of an upcoming episode here too. So Milan's schizotypal subtypes involve schizoid and avoidant features, 2 of the overlapping ones, and then his defective structures, which are the ones that can fall apart into psychosis, are paranoid, borderline, and schizotypal.
Yes. And we will get to these things in the upcoming episodes of this series. It's really interesting stuff, especially Milan's structurally defective personalities like schizotypal. Super, super interesting. But let's do a quick recap for now, because there's a lot here and there's a lot that we unpacked. So we learned that being on the cusp of psychosis and schizotypal isn't just a one-time thing. It's pervasive It's lifelong. Sometimes, but not always, schizotypal is a precursor to schizophrenia, where the individual goes into full psychosis. But many schizotypals, possibly even most, just hang out in that quasi-psychotic place.
Right. And we can tell that they are in that near psychotic realm by their ideas of reference and other signs of cognitive slippage. Their oddness is present in beliefs, speech, sensory experiences, appearance, behaviors, etc.
Yeah.
They often experience depersonalization or other dissociative phenomena. Emotions are generally not quite right for the situation, and they trend towards social anxiety and paranoia, resulting in very limited relationships.
Yes, and it's not psychotic. Close, but not quite. And the oddities and problems with speech and relationships are not due to autism. But this is all complex stuff, which is why we love it, firstly, but it's also why we're doing a whole series on what it means to live in that borderline psychotic space, specifically as it relates to the schizotypal personality. But on that note, that's a wrap for today. So thank you for joining us on this episode of The Personality Couch. Make sure to check out our blogs that coincide with these episodes at www.personalitycouch.com. And as always, don't forget to give us a thumbs up or rate and review us on your favorite podcast app. And on YouTube, hit that bell so you don't miss a single episode in our Schizotypals series. Be well, be kind, and we'll see you next time on The Personality Couch. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute a professional relationship. If you're in need of professional help, please seek out appropriate resources in your area. Information about clinical trends or diagnoses are discussed in broad and universal terms and do not refer to any specific person or case.